And we're alive, or are we? With Halloween in full swing, you might wonder who is alive and who is not.
Oh, we are not alive.
We are now.
We are not alive.
Well, and we're alive, or are we? Today's office hours are a little bit different. Normally, we talk about Terraform, we talk about console, boundary, the things that make life easy. But easy is for the living, for today, for tonight. I invite you to listen to the stories that nearly killed us. My name is Kerim Satirli. I'm a disaster advocate at HashiCorp, where I focus on the infrastructure product line and talk about enchanting public clouds. I'm joined today by an exquisite and lively group of guests. And in the order of these innocent souls appear on my screen, I would like to introduce you to Gurney Greene, HashiCorp's Director of Community Development and Mischief. Next up, Rosemary, flesh-eating plant wrangler extraordinaire and builder of bridges that remove technical and cultural barriers. Please don't clap for Taylor Dolezal, because the loud sound scared a rabbit he wants to show us. And finally, please welcome my co-ghost for today, Tracy P. Holmes. Thank you all for being here. Now, I understand that for today, we have a couple of students joining us. As is common with the educational system in many countries, I wasn't given the list to do roll call, but I expect all of you to be here and to be doing your homework. So Professor Tim's class, thank you for joining us today. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Melissa and our first horror story.
I get to go first?
You get to go first.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So you just want me to start on it, huh?
I want to hear what happened.
This
you
is
can always build up the suspense.
Around a... This is a story about a zombie network configuration that came back to life in the middle of a bank day at a bank. So this was several years ago now. The bank no longer exists, but I was on a several month long 1 petabyte data migration at this bank. And it was the first 1 petabyte data migration the company had ever done, big fanfare and all that stuff. And essentially, there were a couple of piece parts here that were kind of to blame for what happened. But what had happened is after 6 months of migrations, the storage switch configuration, which is essentially the device that says, yes, this server can speak to this high-end storage, and it tracks all the lists, kind of like a firewall, essentially. It went down because it reverted to a 6-month-old network configuration. So 6 months of data migrations had been magically undone with the app still live in the middle of a production workday for the bank. Now, this happened because of what I will call a crude predecessor of Terraform that existed, that we had in the environment that had essentially stopped working 6 months ago. And this piece of software was supposed to provide an easy kind of click-through way to do all your zoning needs, right? Or routing needs, or whatever you want to call it, right? It was supposed to be easy and click through. And it was until it stopped working because the environment got too big. So we had turned it off and gone to like manual configurations and scripts and everything else. But someone who had just come back from vacation decided to use the software anyway because it was still out there, hit the button, and it reverted everything, right? So, of course, fire up the war rooms. Everybody's in a room together trying to get this stuff back up. And the other configurations were still kind of existing on the router, but just not enabled. So we're going through and we're typing in as fast as we can. And we've got executives and, bank, we're losing X number of dollars for every minute we're down. Oh no, what about our apps? These apps are critical. All this in the ear while you're trying to quickly kind of reconfigure things, right? So, so yeah, we got it back up in about an hour, maybe a little longer, but it was a nightmare at the time. Yeah, those old configurations when they're saved can get you. Uh-oh.
The bank no longer exists, or you could say it is dead.
Yes, it is effectively dead.
How many innocent souls did this incident claim?
Oof, I am not entirely sure. To be honest, it claimed at least one. Let's put it that way. We used to refer to those as resume generating events. It was definitely the case in this scenario, but yeah, we tried as best we could to kind of protect the people, innocent and guilty, as much as possible. But it definitely claimed at least one life.
I mean, Kerim, is a bank a living object? Because it's
Yeah,
the bank no
exactly.
longer exists. We're not really talking about one person at this point.
Well, can we
That
at
wasn't
least
the
agree?
reason the bank doesn't exist anymore. But that's another story.
Dead,
I had
dead.
to start. It's a common thing. It's like the best horror stories are from financial services, which is not the worst thing. It's just the nature of systems, right?
Yeah, especially when you've got so many demands and you can't go down. Because systems like to go down.
We're supposed to be like very, very cryptic about all this, right? Like we're supposed to be mysterious about all these infrastructure gone wrong situations.
We can be. I think it's good manners to be a little mysterious about it. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not allowed to say the thing that went wrong the most.
Yeah. I have a lot of these stories. I actually used to be kind of a bit of a rescue team in my own right. I guess I just kind of like the chaotic situations they kind of throw me into, or I did at the time. So I have a lot of these stories. So I can pull another one out of the hat if we need to, but happy to give someone else the floor. Yes.
I feel like Melissa's official air quote generator at this point.
Oh no.
Rescue team. I love it.
Since this is a bank and affected money, would you say that it was a senseless mistake?
Oh.
Like Kerim, you have a buzzer in that.
Yeah. You should have been prepared with the buzzer. For our Wally.
Or a scream, at least.
Yeah.
Oh, there's definitely screams. But there was nothing in your pun that was scream-worthy.
It was bad. It was bad.
We'll try again. We'll try again later.
I hope for many more puns for the next 50 minutes. So if you're just joining us, because I see the numbers going up, which is beautiful. I'm guessing that's a couple of students that are late to today's show. That's okay. We won't tell Professor Tim. Oops. We're telling war stories, horror stories today. Things gone wrong with infrastructure, which we all love to not talk about because they scarred us. But when we share these stories, we all learn from each other and we become better engineers, better professionals. And keep in mind that these are things that happen to us. If you have your own story, definitely let us know because everyone loves drama. And with that, Rosemary.
Which one do you want to hear? I did pre-stage a few, so you get to choose out of the bunch.
My personal preference would be the one you can talk about because it is the one you can talk about.
All right. There are two of them. All right. Well, I'll start with this one because I will call it the poltergeist of the jumbo MTU frames. And it's a two-parter over the course of 2 years. So I used to work on software-defined networking, like actually building software-defined networks. And one day we had rolled out a pretty big deployment and people had been using it, a bunch of containers in development. And each container had their own IP, courtesy of the software-defined network, which is pretty cool. I learned so much about low-level networking, but also container networking. And it was like, I thought it was great at the time. But it was like me, the one person who knew how to code, and then a number of people on the team who did not know how to code, but had really big network expertise. Like, took the Cisco exams, and they're brilliant people. One of them wrote a book on BGP, which for those who are not familiar with BGP is like possibly the greatest horror story in the world, because literally BGP runs the entire internet and it's a mess. So, I was like, wow, these people are experts. It's all great. But there was one kind of problem in that they didn't like infrastructure as code and they didn't like automation. And it wasn't that it was like they didn't like it. There was like a fear, right? It was almost like a haunted house of horrors. Like you wouldn't go near it, but like you could go through it to get to the other side where there's like a lovely, rainbows, unicorns and everything. But you don't want to go through it because something could go horribly awry. So they were sort of like, eh. So they created the underlying network routing for this software-defined network. And I was just sitting there like waiting for this. It was like the beating heart, right, in the floorboards, where it's like, oh no, something is happening. Like something is bound to happen. And one weekend, I was at a bachelorette party. Yes, we have lives. Engineers have lives. I was at a bachelorette party in the middle of like New York, and someone called me and he said, you have to get on this call. I get on this call. It's a war room with 50 people, and they're all puzzling because magically a BGP route underlying the software-defined network was routing to some ether, some black hole somewhere. So people were reporting in development teams, like, we can't do anything. Our container traffic's like gone. Nothing is happening. So I was like this black hole. I'm at this bachelorette party. I'm like, wow, it's kind of noisy in here. How do you even debug? I'm like, I can't get home because it's like an hour away. So I'm standing there like in a very dark room in a corner, trying to like plug one ear with the phone and like trying to talk through one of the people on the team and like how to git commit, basically, because they had to redeploy the entire software-defined network on top of the BGP routes once they fixed it. And then once we deployed everything again, it still wasn't working. And development teams were reporting like anything over X number of like our post requests are just not working. We're like, what? Why just post requests, not get requests, not anything post requests? So it turns out that the underlying servers, because of this SDN configuration, needed jumbo MTU frames. And because these servers were configured as one-offs, no one remembered to configure the MTU frames as a second step whenever we redeployed everything. So I basically spent the entire bachelorette party sitting in a corner with my phone in my ear, talking through how to do a git commit, and then debugging MTU frames. And I just sort of like, when I hung up on the phone, I was like, I just have to get home to my computer. My friend who was the bride at the time was like, you are abandoning me for a system. I was like, yes, I'm sorry. Our friendship has survived. It's okay. But that was my horror story. Now, the poltergeist of MTU frames actually did come back and haunt me, which we can do in a second part because I've talked way too long. But there is a second part to the MTU frames in a separate circumstance.
So the containers, they were like Madame Esmeralda. They communicated with the dead clusters.
Oh, it wasn't even dead clusters. It was just like nowhere. It was going nowhere. It was just like, we don't even know where it was going.
But if
the
you
tabs
don't
weren't
believe
on.
in the superstitious, then it will never go anywhere. You must believe in the power of Madame Esmeralda.
No, there was no saving this. Like, I was for days after, I was like, I could burn sage. I could like try some witchery or something, who knows what, like it just wasn't happening. But the good news,
you were going to try sage. Did you really say you were going to sage them?
You never knew. It could be like something not so great with it. I don't know. So we did fix it afterward. Like we did go and we did automate it afterward. And then we all learned our lesson about BGP routing, and BGP routing is hard. I couldn't do it. So I admire anybody who's brave enough to go tackle BGP.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on the sage. I'm trying to imagine you like inviting a priest, a Wiccan priestess, and anybody else that could bring you some crystals and some holy water to go with the sage, just to make sure that everything goes right.
That's my mother.
I've legit been in a data center that's been blessed. And not only that, but I actually called somebody and suggested they do it to theirs because of something that was going on. So yeah, it's a thing.
The ghost in the machine is definitely there.
Yes,
Time to do
very
it.
much so. That was spot on. Beautiful job.
Yeah, I don't know, Kerim. Maybe you need to get your house blessed. Sounds like you have some company.
I had a few new friends today that I wasn't very pleased about. We're redecorating. It's not working well. New pets. Taylor, I hear you have a story about pets too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, pets instead of cattle, indeed. So my story begins on a strangely sunny morning. I believe it was a Wednesday, a day just like this, just -1 in the week, obviously. And this story is around queues. So at a previous job, we were moving to orchestration platforms. Teams were tired of deploying to bare metal instances and dealing with on-prem solutions. And they had heard about this mysterious cloud that had just drifted in off of the ocean, or just, maybe it's just infrastructure actually. And they wanted to move to the cloud. So they had a pretty good understanding of their systems and all the dependencies in which they used. And one of those models that they used was a generator consumer type pattern. So they would have one job that would generate things that get put on a queue, and then another one would consume them and actually run them, kind of like background tasks. So we decided to move this to an orchestration platform. And unfortunately, this orchestration platform and the timing didn't quite line up. And it happened that the orchestration platform and the rabbitmq recommended way of setting that up wasn't really ready for prime time, unfortunately, which is pretty spooky, because if you don't know how your systems are running, strange and evil things can happen. What had happened here was around 3 a.m. I got a call from PagerDuty and was alerted that all of a sudden the rabbitmq cluster just wasn't working right, wasn't starting up. It was exhibiting signs of having a split brain condition, almost like a zombie. And when I logged in and took a look at it, within this orchestration platform, it was Kubernetes. Yes, it was Kubernetes. We had 3 stateful sets running for this rabbitmq cluster. And the way in which this Helm chart worked that we had set up, it was set to look at the -0 stateful set for that rabbitmq pod and kind of pull the Erlang cookie and just kind of get all this downstream metadata and information about it. Unfortunately, there was a problem. One of the nodes had gone down, spun back up, and when it started back up, it got into corrupt state. So being that it was corrupt and undead in a sense, wasn't able to pull all that configuration down to the other nodes, and so had to end up scaling this giant cluster down and all the way down to one pod, getting that back together, and then scaling back up. So it was to deal with this horde and all these race conditions that we had. It was a very fun problem to solve downstream, but it was probably one of the spookiest nights I think I've had to live through in managing infrastructure.
Like yours are related to Melissa's. I think you all should have had a conversation.
We need to get those data centers blessed stat.
Yep.
Problems that occur when your demon sets turn into demons on their own.
I've never been so scared at 3 a.m. None of the stuff, nothing good ever tends to happen out in the light. My parents always used to tell me when I was younger, nothing good happens after 2 a.m. And that I've seen that be very true in infrastructure specifically.
In infrastructure, definitely nothing good happens after 2 a.m.
No, we have a pretty well planned out transition for tonight. It just takes 30 minutes of downtime. It's 1 to 1:30 and nothing can go wrong. We tested this.
Yeah, and there's a big party, and there's pizza, and there's all this stuff, right? And everybody who needs to be on hand just in case is on hand, and then all of a sudden the little bats come out and take down your infrastructure, and you're like, oh, I never imagined.
The bats were always there.
Yeah.
I think there's always going to be complexity, right? And I guess, I think one thing that I did learn out of all this was never, you could be as afraid as you want to of making changes, but like it's gonna have to happen. And if it's bad, it's bad. There are ways you remediate it, but you just have to do it sometimes, and it's okay.
It is definitely that. So while we wait for some questions in a live chat, if you're just joining us, feel free to ask questions about our stories gone wrong or share your own. We'll happily dissect and tell you that codifying your infrastructure really can solve a lot of problems. For the moments when we didn't, this is what brings you Halloween stories like this. So I want to share.
Can I tell my MTU poltergeist?
Yes, do it.
Please.
Do it. While we're
Unless Kerim, you want to share something.
Yeah.
I think I'll go last.
What?
So, Rosemary.
Technically, you would be going last, as everybody else has already gone at least once.
This is very fair.
Except for Tracy, who hasn't gone either. Neither of our hosts have gone.
Because Tracy doesn't have a story. My scariest story is how I took prod down on purpose. And I don't think that's a story that needs to be told.
What?
I might get some feedback on that one. So that's okay. I'm going to defer to Gurney.
So if you know me, or at least if you read my Twitter bio, I like climbing. I like climbing rocks, which means I'm generally a couple hundred feet up in the air when you can actually go outside. And I generally don't try to do server maintenance at that point. But a couple years back, I'm on vacation, I'm working at a startup, and this is the first time I'm actually getting vacation, because I was the front-end engineer, I was the back-end engineer, I was also the operations engineer. It was very educational, also very stressful. So imagine you're 200 feet up in the air, you're hanging off a rope that's maybe a quarter inch thick, and this is perfectly safe. As I said, we're all professionals here. And your backpack starts vibrating. You're like, what the hell is that? So you find a resting spot, your backpack is still vibrating, and you grab your phone and you see 20 missed calls from your colleague who promised to take care of the service while you were gone. Now imagine I was working for an ad tech startup that had a lot of service. So any small change, service mesh wasn't this thing. Codifying infrastructure didn't go further than having bash scripts. And even those weren't always great. So a couple hundred feet up in the air, I look at my phone, and clearly something must have happened because my colleague would know not to call me. So I call back, and I need to dig up this photo because it's actually a pretty cool one hanging off the wall. And I go like, what's up? My colleague is like, quick question. And no tech incident ever started with quick question and turned out to be a quick question. How do you fix the permissions on a root disk? Like, can you expand on that? I may have run chmod and may have messed something up there. Like, cool. On which server? On all of them. When you say all of them, which environment? Well, I was building a bash script. Okay. And you had all the SSH keys on your machine to connect to all of them. Yes, I did. So fast forward half an hour later, we managed to disconnect the disks, shut down the servers one by one, mount the disks on a new instance, and then fix the permissions there as much as possible. It worked out. And we're good, right? Like, I hang up the phone after confirming everything was done and was fine. And I continue my climb. And as I get up there, I send a quick text message. Hey, how's it going? Hoping for a simple answer. It's 3 or 4 in the afternoon, so there's nothing that, was going to be critical, no more maintenance. And I get a text message back saying, I think our MongoDB server has some problems. Okay, cool. Let's have a look at that. This is a startup. There was no $19 per month that we had for PagerDuty. There was no $20 subscription to server density or whatever service was available at that point. The monitoring was humans, partially alive, not paying a lot of attention. Okay, so what's with Mongo? It can't find the disks. Okay, this is easy. Go into the AWS console, find the servers, and tell me which disks are connected. I don't see any disks. Like, what do you mean? Each server has at least 3 disks attached to it. And if you know anything about Mongo, you know that there's a lot of disks attached. There's a lot of file system work that has to go in to make it work well. He had modified the script, discovered the AWS CLI. The IAM account attached to his profile allowed him to carry out admin actions and operations, such as forcefully unmounting disks and deleting them. We lost 1 terabyte of text data. And I was not able to restore that on the top of the mountain. It was one of the better days to not be in the office.
Yeah, I can imagine. We've done some data loss things. I've dealt with some data loss things too. I'm sorry.
It was definitely one of the most stressful moments in my career to have that conversation.
On a mountain.
On a mountain. Yeah, that was definitely, even just thinking about it, hanging off the side on my phone and trying not to get stressed out enough to the point where you would fumble and drop it. Whew. Yeah, that was good times. 1 terabyte of text data, of clicks and ads. I'm sorry for invading your privacy there, but we did that only to help you get the best possible flight to wherever you didn't really want to go.
Oh.
I think that's the horror story there.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that because that too had official fines attached to it.
Yeah.
So you simultaneously were enjoying new heights and lows at the same time. That's pretty impressive.
There was a lot of altitude meters and uptime, but yeah, there was definitely some downtime. It taught me early on that on-call is never off-call, especially not when you're
not at a startup, not ever.
No, yeah.
I chuckled because I had my honeymoon on startup time, and yeah, I ended up working for half of it.
No.
Not the recent one, the original. So like 15 years ago. But
Good night. Kerim, you have some Jono left you a couple of good ones in the chat. He wanted you to answer.
So let's see. Yeah, definitely 1 terabyte. Imagine every time you're on whatever news site you read and you click an ad, in a few milliseconds, that generates a little bit of text information. And that ad tech was able to help you understand your journey through the internet. Not ever telling you about it, but there was definitely data for it. Valuable data that people paid good money for. It was all lost.
Let's see. We had another one too.
Oh, yay. Nick's joining us late. Hi, Nick.
Let's see, Kerim, the other one was, so does that mean that the war room is now the crypt?
For October 29th, it is definitely the crypt.
Is it though? Because like I feel like a crypt is a little too peaceful for a war room.
Thank you.
I feel like it should be like one of the circles of hell or something.
I had a manager who called like the firewall setup at like the firewall networking setup, the Dante 7 levels of hell.
Yes.
So it's very possible.
And I feel like firewall setups kind of belong in one of those levels too. I have 2 million lines of firewall rules. We can't change anything. Are you kidding me? It might break something. You leave that firewall alone.
I do have a fantastic abbreviated tale pertaining to DNS that was similar to that. And at a previous employer, we had some DNS records that were kind of like flickering, coming up, coming down, and enough people were impacted across the entire giant organization that people started wondering what the heck was going on. And our group got called because it was our subdomain and modifiers off of that subdomain. And when we ended up going through it, the entirety of this issue took, I believe it was like 13 hours. I got to sit on the bridge call the entire time from start to finish because I was the incident manager. And thank goodness it started at like early in the morning and went until like past dinner time. Well, not great, but could have been at an earlier hour. And it was so funny sitting and working with the group that was going through and fixing each of these DNS hops. What the issue ended up being was that every single hop got misconfigured. And so somebody that was jumping in there, they're like, oh, this is horrible. Who did this? And then they kept doing that at every single hop. There were a total of, I believe it was like 15 to 20 hops that needed to be reconfigured. We finally got all the way down to that final record, and it was a hard-coded IP that should have never been hard-coded, which is just really fantastic. Very spooky.
We'll change that when the environment is live. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
Oops.
Yep.
Rosemary's Poltergeist, Part 2.
Part 2, indeed.
Part 2. I call it my poltergeist because it keeps coming up. Yeah, I was different. Oh yeah. Do you have like a ghostly giggle? Can I get a ghostly giggle? No? Okay. Never mind.
Okay, that'll work. We'll take it.
Psycho works.
Good enough. It was like 2 days before go live, right? And it was a greenfield application, full refactor, migrating from a legacy monolith to microservices, the whole 9 yards. I was on the platform or engineering team, whatever you call it these days. But it basically the person who was responsible for infrastructure and adjacencies. And it was probably like 6 p.m. Eastern. Everybody was about to go home when the team lead on the development side, tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, our requests aren't going through. I was like, what? We just pushed to QA and our requests aren't going through. I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. Every request? No, like none of the requests? No, everything seems fine except for when we like write a payment. And I was like, oh, okay. So everything, he's like, yeah, everything works except for when we write a payment. So I'm like, okay, walk me through it. So we debug. Previously, the week before, we had rolled out a CIS hardened image to Kubernetes clusters, right? And so we were like, oh, maybe we didn't do enough testing and we rolled it out to QA and we left it in regression just to make sure nothing happened. Maybe it's that. So we're like looking at the CIS image. We've like gone through IP tables, figuring out if maybe the CIS image just shut down and locked some IP tables, noticed one or two of the IP tables being consistent. So we just decided to roll forward the previous image, right? We roll forward the previous image, looking at the functionality, still nothing. Nothing is happening. He's telling me I can't write payments. And I'm like, okay, can you just give me the integration tests that I can run so that you can go home? And so he's like, no, it's fine. Just, sit here. I'm like, I don't know how long this is going to be. So we are probably hitting around like 7:30, 8 p.m. because I've reverted all the changes to this very large Kubernetes cluster. And, it was just like, well, what do we do? So I've gone down the rabbit hole and I start looking at Kubernetes versions. I start looking at the networking components. And I was like, wait a second. How big is the payload for the payment right that you're making? He goes, well, I'm looking at it and it's 1534. I was like, no. So for those who are not as familiar with networking, most servers are configured for an MTU frame size of 900, right? And it turns out that when you do any kind of software-defined networking, because that's how software-defined networking works, you add bytes in the form of headers as part of those frames. So when you add bytes, that means that any payload that is above a certain threshold basically gets cut off or dropped because it's not to size. It can't, it cannot truncate or break it down. It's not TCP, right? So it's much lower level. So the MTU size was too small. But then I was like, this was working before. Like, what did we change? There's nothing that we changed. Why would it be? And so then I noticed Calico was in the cluster. And for those who are also more or less familiar with networking, so there's the software-defined networking from cloud provider. And then there was Calico, which is the network policy component that you can deploy onto Kubernetes. Turns out Calico adds headers too. So with everybody adding headers, no requests with payloads over 1500 were ever going through because of all the header sizes, et cetera. So 900 plus the additional, nothing was ever going through. So I was like, oh no. So at that point, it was like, well, do we actually change the MTU size on every underlying server to go jumbo frames? Or do we fix payloads? Unfortunately, after much digging through documentation, we did a break glass where you can expand or decrease the allowed payload size in Calico to account for headers. So the allowed payload size, I was squished it down. Yeah. MTU posted. Yes, thank you, Jono. It was 900 plus the 600 and headers. Sorry, maths are hard. Maths are hard. Brain implosion. Yes, maths are hard. So basically, in order to truncate the payload size so that it actually fits with the SDN headers plus the Calico headers equals new change, break glass, manual change. We had to do that across dev, QA, and eventually prod. And we did actually roll that back into infrastructure as code and reflect it as part of state. But yeah, I was telling the developer who was sitting next to me, pairing with me at the time, I was like, I didn't expect this to come back again. He goes, how do you know this? No one thinks about MTU frame sizes. I was like, I don't know. That's the only other time I've ever seen post requests never go through. So lesson to be learned. If your MTU sizes, or if your post requests don't go through, check your payload size. So it's fantastic. That was my poltergeist. MTUs. It came back a third time, but we're not going to go into that story. I can't actually say that story.
I can't. Yeah, I had forgotten all about MTUs, to be honest with you. It's been that long. And I'm so thankful for this story because I used to fight MTUs a lot. And that was one of the first things you had to do, and why stuff repeatable processes and infrastructure as code in general is so important, because it's those little things that you miss that you spend hours and hours and hours just
It was so bad. And it's it was all dependency, turtles all the way down, right? You have to like backtrack every dependency. I thought it was IP tables. It was not IP tables. I thought it was 10 other things until I remembered this was something very specific. And until we tested it, like there was no way anybody would have known or anybody would have thought about it unless they knew about MTUs, which these days it's easy not to know about them because if you work on cloud, most of it's pretty much handled for you.
I'm being told I have to tell a story, so you're gonna get a one-liner story.
Okay.
Deal? Ready?
A
Two
story is
lines.
a story.
One-liner story. Citrix farm migration.
Oh, that's not a story.
No, it's hell.
That's my blood pressure. Is what that
See?
is.
Did you see? Rosemary she froze. Your blood pressure went up. That's the kind of horror stories we need. There you go. You got your one-liner and a story all at the same time.
Yeah, Tracy, my Apple Watch just said, "Are you okay? Your heart rate's over 120." As soon as you said that, so
I'm glad I took mine off for this.
Ooh, server migrations, the ultimate horror story.
And it was
done a lot of
4.5 to
those.
6.5 at that. And they didn't give us enough resources, as you know, they never give you enough resources. But yeah, Citrix farm migration. That's how I got thrown to the wolves and this administration. I don't miss I do kind of miss it, to be honest. I like just throwing people off of Citrix servers for no reason because they won't shut down when I tell them to, and I kind of miss that.
Oh,
Okay, I'm through.
Super admin. That was fast. Did you actually have a wolf one?
He did. He had to
course.
find it.
he did. Very nice.
I have
All
many
right,
here.
Melissa, forced reboot.
Forced reboot. Goodness. How about several forced reboots? So, goodness. This is like my forced reboot story that's instantly in mind is a small part of a much bigger story. So I'm going to tell the bigger story and then insert the forced reboot in. But this is kind of the ghost of performance past, right? I was at a certain retailer getting ready for Black Friday, and we had developed this sort of cookie cutter system that we could drop in to help them do performance reporting and support their Black Friday reports and inventory and stuff like that, right? So there were a bunch of systems in place, and this giant, well, I say giant, 10 to 20 node Oracle cluster that was doing like these high performance reporting workloads, right? So that they could like make changes to their business and do all the kind of tricky, fun things to make an impact, kind of like Kerim talked about earlier, right? So running Red Hat, I can say Red Hat, that's fine. They're not guilty. We were running Red Hat and it was awesome, but I had essentially developed a crude version of infrastructure as code that was a ton of batch files that I did a bunch of copy replace on, right? So when I came back to implement this specific system, I had my batch files in hand and whatnot. And we had new hardware on the server side and on the storage side, and some new things in place that were like, oh, my minor upgrade, better performance, all that stuff, get it all set up in like 3 days because scripts, and then waiting for Red Hat to reboot with all the devices and waiting for Oracle to recognize all the devices and all the things that kind of add up, right? Get back, everything's set up, they're running. Performance is like, what was it? 25% of what the old hardware did at like trying to push to max throttle, and then everything would just choke, crash, and die, right? Like no explanation, no log file, no like so we're sitting in this room, and y'all have heard part of the story, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what the heck happened? How did this go wrong? And the first thing somebody said is, well, we didn't change anything. And I was like, technically that's not true. So I go to the whiteboard and I start writing down all the things we changed, and I ended up filling the whiteboard, and I'm like, oh, maybe this is part of it. So we're going through and we're checking things off like one by one, like, okay, we know it's not this, we know it's not this. In the middle of that, engineering and support, like the tier 3 engineers or whatever that are supporting us, because we're on robocalls, because it's like 2 or 3 days before Black Friday. And of course, this is a new system that we dropped in just to save them for Black Friday. And so of course we're doing testing like 2 or 3 days before, right? So they're like, we need to change the software for the pathing to all the devices, right? So essentially how to help Oracle manage how to get the most performance out of these devices and get the data to where it needs to be. So I changed the software, brought it back up. Oracle doesn't recognize anything. And I'm like, wow, this is better. Right? So digging in and trying to figure out, okay, yeah, test and prod every time. That's the only way we test here. So so I'm going back in and trying to figure that out and trying to figure all this stuff out. Many, oh my gosh, we have to reboot again later. Of which, Red Hat takes at least 2 hours to reboot with that many devices, by the way. And that's if you're lucky. Sometimes it's 4. And then like figuring out. It's Black Friday. This stuff still isn't working. And at this point, I'm sleeping like under the conference table and then getting up to do the next thing that, support engineering recommends. And we're fighting through it. And it turned out to be a host BIOS issue. So of all the performance things, like something at the host level was throttling the host CPUs down when it hit a certain throughput threshold out of the system, like just shutting it down. And yeah, we figured it out, but many forced reboots and a whole lot of let's reconfigure this whole thing and see if we get better performance. And I'm like, I'm so glad I have my batch scripts that I can just copy replace on, because this would have taken weeks. But it's still, kind of crude.
Oh my God, those last minute changes, they are so familiar. It's like, no, it will work fine. It always worked. It never, ever.
But why save it to right before Black Friday? Like I was about to say something work related, and I had to. I'll type that one later because you'll get it. But why wait until right before Black Friday? Why test it 3 days before Black Friday when the biggest load known to man is about to fall on everyone's head?
Perfect storm, right? Like the hardware release was a little late. The delivery cycles for certain equipment was a little late. They had some restrictions on their end on how things had to be brought into the data center. Then they had to figure out a way to copy the existing data over to the new thing. And that took like a whole cycle of, we were doing literally sneakernet on that one, where we would drop in a big device, store everything, and then literally wheel it down the street to the other data center and spin it all up over there. There were so many things that went wrong with that, and so many kind of little weird things that happened, that it all just kind of crashed into Black Friday and then extended basically until New Year's. Like that was a very unhappy holiday season. Just lots of overtime and lots of grumpiness and no real good answers for a while. So yeah.
It's these stories are definitely the familiar kind. I was thinking of my horror stories. Mine are all related to data loss, and that's kind of sad. All of them happen just after large imports of lots of data. And so this one you might appreciate. It's a company that has been publishing paper magazines for the past 60 years. And so, as with many companies, they want to get all their stuff indexed, searchable. And so we set up a search product on Amazon Cloud. And from day one, the cluster does not report itself as green. It reports itself as yellow, even with just a megabyte of data imported. We couldn't figure it out, but we decided to continue forward because our account manager told us it's fine. And imagine that GIF of the dog sitting in a room that's burning, and you're like, you know what, this is fine. Salesperson said it's fine. Let's continue forward. We only have another 3 weeks to import everything. So let's get this done. And we do. And we found out that we could scan all the PDFs into one large file per magazine of nearly a gigabyte of data, and then split it up. But the splitting up process takes a lot of time. So when you're running it in dev, you comment out that step, because in dev, you're working with very short magazines. Then when your pull request is reviewed and this graduates to production, of course, nobody re-enabled this step because you don't change the pull request once it's been reviewed. So we're importing all the PDFs as one large file. And with the first search, we somehow managed to completely mess up the cluster. 60 years of PDF data gone like that. It's beautiful. And it makes me think that it doesn't even matter if you codified this, because the only thing that you could have done here is do it all over again in the same horrible way. Humans are really the best kind of problem to have and the hardest to solve for.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with best kind of problem to have. But yes, definitely the to solve for.
That's interesting, Kerim, in terms of data loss. There's a very special type of data loss that I, within the past decade, had to deal with at one of my previous employers, called ransomware. And I found that particularly interesting, where we had a, oh goodness, what was it? It was a Elasticsearch cluster that happened to have a 0.0.0/0 on it, and turned out being thank goodness the data wasn't terribly important and could get easily regenerated. But one day the production application stopped working. And when someone went in to go take a look at the Elasticsearch cluster, there was just one index and a message on it that said, hey, we have your data. If you send 0.1 BTC to us at this email address, here's the wallet address. Just send that and we'll give you your data back. Otherwise, we're gonna publish it. And thank goodness, that ended up being mitigated and fixed. But the reason that 9200 port was open was because someone just put in a firewall request and said they wanted to be able to access that Elasticsearch cluster from home. So never trust convenience. Never get complacent with your networks and who has access to them.
Yeah. And not one person here has said anything about disaster recovery. Like, I'm starting to.
That used to be my job, so I can tell you some stories about that if you want. That was technically my specialty.
I feel like if the disaster recovery stories, though, are the ones that we're not supposed to say. Like, you're supposed to be rather like.
Oh, I can tell them.
Censored.
I'm not shy. So it really depends on the type of the disaster, right? Like the data loss stories, most of them I can't tell, but the other ones, well, actually there's a couple of them I can tell.
Stories are lost?
Legal. The stories are very much here, but for legal reasons, even anonymized, I'm not comfortable talking about the loss of, say, personal information and things that are legally required to keep, like medical records, bank
like
documents,
HIPAA and PII,
legal documents, that stuff, right? But I can tell one. So this is another one from that kind of fire team days, I guess. We had a stretch cluster going from coast to coast in the US, right? And it was a Microsoft SQL server And it wasn't SQL Server's fault, so so I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty here. But we had this software that sat on top of it that enabled it to be a stretch cluster and feel like it was in the same data center, right? Because we had replication going between the two places and the data looked the same, and we could do it. So I get a call and they're like, there's only so many people that know this stretch cluster solution. You've fixed this before. Another data loss scenario, but but this time it's just that the cluster is down and support's not getting very far, so we need your help. So I joined the call and I talked to the customer first. I'm like, okay, what's going on? And they're like, well, our production system is down. We're losing X number of dollars per hour. And it's some ridiculous stress-inducing amount, like $1 million an hour or something, you know, like bigger than it is now, but still pretty stinking big. And we're going through it and they're like, we just need to get back up. So then I get on the call with support and support's like, we just need to fix this issue between the two sites so that their DR is intact, right? And I'm like, hold up a second. Rule number 1 of disaster recovery, and my favorite rule to share with anybody, is declare a disaster. Okay, so when you're supporting someone and trying to figure out how to give them support, you got to figure, you've got to ask the question, are we fixing this because something in the background is broken, or are we fixing this because production's down, right? And in this case, we were fixing it because production was down, but the level of support we were at, the person was trying to fix the whole thing instead of the immediate problem, right? So I get in there and I'm looking at this cluster, I'm scratching my head and I'm like, okay, support, I got to ask you something. I know you want to fix this in the background. I also know how long this takes to fix in the background. It's like days. What if we tore the cluster apart, right? Would that work? And he's like, I wouldn't support it. So I'm like, so this is where I go rogue and it's crazy. But then I talk to the customer. I'm like, what's more important to you? Trying to get back online or trying to fix this issue? What level of disaster are we at? And of course, they're like, we got to get back online. And I'm like, okay, we're going to uninstall the software and see where we get with just the local cluster. And we did that. And thankfully, everything came online. There was some crash issues, but we cleaned it up and it came back. But yeah, we had some serious disaster recovery issues as a result of that. Their DR solution was dead in the water for a week, but prod was up, so it worked out for the business. But it was a scary situation to be in because it's like, well, if this doesn't work, then prod is down and your DR solution's kind of broke. So we're just trying this as kind of a Hail Mary to kind of figure it out and see what we can do to kind of save things. But it was scary times for sure.
Disaster recovery usually starts with a disaster and it ends feeling like one. So when you have a disaster, don't panic. Declare that you have a disaster so more people can join in. Note how Melissa used to be the search and rescue team and then ended up being on the fire team. You might wonder what the change there is.
Well, now instead of causing my own mischief, I have a team that does it for me. So I have scaled successfully.
Now, mischief. I'm not mischievous. I don't think, personally. At least not
the best kind of mischief. The best kind of mischief.
Okay.
All of you are, and you're better than me at it. So I appreciate you all.
More tea, like really hot tea.
That sounds like somebody that's really good at mischief. Exactly what they would say too. I'm like, me? No.
Mischief managed.
But he's the one with the minions head.
Yes.
He's got a minion mask on his head, and I'm the one that's mischievous.
No, that's Wally.
That's Wally.
Is
With the Yeah, it's
Wally.
weird because of the ears, but it's Wally.
Yeah.
It's
My
definitely
bad.
horror,
Like a-
Wally.
It looked like a two-eyed minion. Apologies, minions. Did not mean to insult you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's running Nomad in each eyeball. That's how Wally stays online.
That would be cool. That would
I'm
be
over here
cool.
Looking at comments about Kate's on Nomad, and that's an entire new stream on its own.
And Kate's on Kate's and all that.
Kate's
We need
on
more
Kate's on Kate's.
stories.
Yeah. So I've been
Real horror
told
stories.
by our mischief wrangler to ask this question, which is, in retrospect, how would infrastructure as code have helped any of these horror stories?
I kind of covered that in mine, but I'm kind of curious as to who your mischief wrangler is.
The mysterious individual who's behind the HashiCorp handle right now.
Ah, I see.
But there's many of us.
Yeah. We probably shouldn't say this on air, but do you know how many people have access to that right now?
I don't.
Like, we
I can
are all
honestly say
HashiCorp.
I'm not on that handle right now.
I'm not. So, we'll just leave it a mystery for our community joiners out there. There's someone behind the handle, maybe multiple people. No one really knows.
It's kind of like the popular game right now, Among Us. We don't know who it is. It could be one of us. We have no idea.
I know, it's a game of Among Us.
Taylor's
Yes.
always the
Yellow is
imposter.
sus.
I'm gonna hate that word by the end of the year. I
It
guess
was green. I saw it, and blue was standing next to me.
Self-report.
it probably would have helped me when we did our data center move, because I got hella overtime that weekend and literally lived on site because my team lead and I were the only two based out of that particular location. Everyone else was across the country, way up in Portland. And yeah, some things broke. I'm blaming it on the Unix team. And Terraform actually would have, I can't believe I'm going to say this. No one record this. Terraform might have kind of, sort of, maybe it would have helped us spin everything else back up quickly. Okay, I said it.
Yeah. Same here. I kind of mentioned it here and there, but like all those batch scripts that I used to write and do global replaces on, like all that stuff was replaced by Terraform in every case except for one, which it was replaced with a Terraform-like thing there. And we'll call that a cloud company now. So hopefully without outing anybody, but yeah.
I just got the best message that I wish would have been posted on the chat. It's not a software-defined problem. It's a meatware-defined problem. And I wish my friend would post this on the chat because it's just so good. But it is what it comes down to. All these disasters couldn't necessarily have been prevented because that's not how disasters work. They don't announce themselves. You can train for them. You can train like you play, and stuff still happens, bad stuff. So make sure you declare your disasters. Train for them. Train how to do incident management. It is one of the most interesting fields for infrastructure engineering, understanding how the systems work together, understanding what doesn't work together, and why, oh why the IP and the interface was bound to 0000. Yes, 5 zeros, and why it still started up. It does happen. Make sure somebody takes the lead. Doesn't have to be you if you don't want to be the incident commander. If you don't feel comfortable, it's a lot of pressure. Also, every Scrum Master will tell you that they're the best suited person for that. Just make sure you're not a bystander. And check out the books and software that helps you build more reliable infrastructure. We'll share some links for that later. And with that, I think we're at the end of today's session.
Oh, this was fun.
This was so much fun. We need to do these things again.
I'm
Rosemary,
totally
somebody
willing
said
to
you have a
more
halo.
horror stories.
Yeah.
Kareem, do you know of any dates or times that we're going to have that Run Book of the Dead published, to prevent some of these things?
Oh.
Ooh.
PR is welcome.
I think we should invite a couple of community members to share their horror stories for the next one.
Maybe we could get
True
some good
story
stuff from
too.
the-
It might be
Yeah,
fun to
horror
recreate
stories
some
too.
of this. Oh, sorry. There's
No,
a
agreed.
lag. Can you?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you.
It might be fun to recreate some of this. I still have all my old batch scripts, and I probably shouldn't say that because I think it makes me some kind of like digital hoarder.
Mhm.
But I kept them all. So we could kind of play around in the lab and recreate most of this stuff and then be like, okay, how would we do this with Terraform? And that could be fun.
Codified horror.
Yeah, codified horror. Reliving the horror, yes. But not in prod this time. Not in prod.
Okay.
Or at least
PRD is not prod,
not officially in prod. I don't know. Ask Nick. He took one down recently, or I think it's coming up. His story on taking down a prod cluster at what DO? Goodness, what's the name of the conference? It's DigitalOcean's conference. But yeah.
So that's why he didn't jump on. Okay.
Oh, he's in the chat.
Thanks everybody in the chat for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
This was a lot of fun. We'll be back next week, Thursday, with our next community office hours. And we actually have a couple of these. So we'll share a link to our our general community office hours page. So you can see what else is going on. Thursdays are Terraform, which is what it should be about because it's Terraform Thursday. And next week, we'll have the Azure provider with Taylor and a few folks from the Azure team. So get your Azure questions ready. We'll tell you how to use service principals. It's not as hard as it might seem. And with that, thank you all. I think we're at time. So any closing words, Melissa? I see you speak the language of the undead.
Oh my goodness, I hit the unmute button. It didn't work. So now I'm matching my outfit here. Thank you all for having me. I feel like I talked too much, but it was a lot of fun and I appreciate it. And yeah, I had fun. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Rosemary, Taylor, any closing words? Any
Always
good
pin your
lessons?
dependencies. Always pin your dependencies. Yeah.
Oh,
That's what's the latest with me.
Spam your dependencies.
There also will be a console office hours on the way, as an FYI. So.
I'm going to end to keep rolling forward.
That is actually solid advice. Suspect as you look right now, it is definitely trustworthy to always roll forward. Stepping back in time doesn't work. Tracy, what's your learning that you want to impart on us?
My learning, and then we'll close, will be, it's never our fault. We just blame Eric.
And with that, thank you all for joining us. This has been a blast. And we'll see you next week.